Morning, everyone. Pharisees. I'm not saying you guys are Pharisees. Pharisees. Now, when I say that word, what comes to mind? Like, what's this stereotypical, Pharisee? What do you see? What do you think of? And when I say that word Pharisee, now just shout out some things that come to mind.
Serious Bible students.
Serious Bible students.
Teachers of the law.
Legalistic. Alright, what else?
Teachers.
Phylacteries. Phylacteries. That was third grade spelling change. Yeah, keep them coming. Tom Brady, that's right. Sorry, Travis. What else? Self-righteous. Good.
Passionate about their faith.
Passionate about their faith. Okay. What else? Anything else about Pharisees? This is pretty good. I'm not necessarily looking for anything, I'm just curious what you all.
And a lust for power.
Good. See that a lot. Anything else?
Receive glory from men.
Like that. Come on, Seth. Receive glory. Wow.
Zeal for God's kingdom to come.
Wendell, that's the star. All right, what was that again? Zeal?
Zeal for God's kingdom to come.
Zeal for God's kingdom.
They hoped in the resurrection.
All right, it's a good list. So what we have in the picture here is it's a little bit complicated of what the Pharisees were. And so this comes to mind, I think it comes to a lot of our minds. And when we look at, you can open up to Luke if you haven't already, if you have your Bibles or your whatever app you use. So we're going to open up to Luke 8:40. That's going to be we'll go back and forth from there. But the Pharisees were often, I think you could say, were often at odds with Jesus. So even in the book of Luke, before chapter 8, what we see is, the Pharisees accuse Jesus of blasphemy when he's interacting with a paralytic that's lowered down to him. He says, your sins are forgiven, and all this. And the Pharisees are like, you're a blasphemer. Later on in the opening of Luke 6, we see the Pharisees accusing Jesus and his disciples of breaking the Sabbath when they're just taking, grain and just kind of mashing it in their hand because they're violating the traditions of the Pharisees. And then, in Luke 4, when Jesus is reading at the local synagogue, he reads Isaiah, and Pharisees, along with the crowd, they're ready to kill Jesus. So we can kind of surmise that the Pharisees have a contentious relationship with Jesus. And later on, and before we get to Luke 8, Luke 6 through 11, we have a story that only appears in this gospel. But it's, let me get to it here. Sorry, wrong passage. Got too many Luke passages here. So I'll get to that here in a minute. But in Luke, they talk about, they plotted against Jesus. So, there we go, Luke 6:11. So he heals a person with a withered hand that's on the Sabbath. The Pharisees completely miss the point of Jesus helping this individual. They're like, why are you doing this on the Sabbath? And they say that, it says here, but they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So just kind of establishing, the Pharisees had issues with Jesus. Jesus routinely violated the traditions of the Pharisees. And through this, like the example of the the man with the withered hand, Jesus is exposing their hypocrisy. We talked about, they were serious Bible students, but they did this, their study is very for themselves, for the glory, like where it's said, the glory of men. And, they were to maintain power, like you said, Mark, And it was not necessarily they had the kingdom in mind, they had their own little kingdom in mind. So, the Pharisees hated Jesus. They accused him of various sins. They sought to undermine his ministry with the people. In John 8, we see, the Pharisees even make mention of Jesus being born out of sexual immorality. So they used gossip. They did not like Jesus. They wanted nothing to do with him. And despite the Pharisees' efforts, Jesus continues to have ministry success. So in Luke 7, here's the passage I was looking for. Luke 7, verses 11 through 17, we see Jesus raising the widow's son. And this is the only gospel that has this account. And at the end of it, it says, the report about Jesus spread throughout the whole country of Judea and all the surrounding country. So despite the Pharisees' efforts, they hate this guy, Jesus is still doing his thing. So with that context, so back to Luke 8, verse 40, I want to look at the life of Jairus today. And, this passage, we've heard it a lot of times, and for a number of you, it's probably not going to be anything new, but sometimes it's good to have a refresher. And so Luke 8:40 and Jairus. So we don't know much about Jairus, his personal opinion of Jesus before the encounter, but like I said, we have a few ideas of what it could be, what his thinking of Jesus is. We know Jairus is a Pharisee. He's a ruler of a synagogue. And we already know the Pharisees' opinion of Jesus at this point. We also know being associated with Jesus is similar to being marked as a contrarian with the Pharisees, and that could lead to trouble. In John chapter 3, Nicodemus, he meets with Jesus in secret at night. He doesn't, we kind of infer that he doesn't want to be associated with Jesus. And later on in John, when the Pharisees are really upset, Nicodemus tries to step in and offer some defense, and the Pharisees get angry at him. So there's some tension there, and there's trouble if you get associated with Jesus. So Luke 8:40, if I could have someone read verses 40 through 42, if you could read out loud, that would be great. You get a volunteer.
Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was the ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying.
Okay.
When Jesus went, the people pressed around him.
All right, thanks, Lisa. So what's remarkable about what Jairus does here in these verses? What was that, Kathy?
He fell at Jesus' feet.
Fell at Jesus' feet. What else?
He responded out of desperation. His back was against the wall. His daughter.
That's good.
His position.
Keep-
Ruler of the synagogue.
He was very public.
Yes.
He gave Jesus an invitation, a very personal one, to come to his house.
He could leave.
He humbled himself.
Anyone else? This is great. No, this is really good. And I think we all know these things, but I think sometimes it's good just to kind of stop and think about what Jairus is doing in that moment. It's one thing when we think about, the sinful woman, who comes and washes Jesus' feet, and it's like, okay. But this is a Pharisee, ruler of the synagogue, and we already know that being associated with Jesus is a huge negative in his community. And he is making a very public declaration, and that he sees something in Jesus that is divine of some sort. We don't know what, but he sees something special in him. He falls at his feet. It's very public. Who's that? Joe or someone? It's like he's not hiding the fact, Jesus, I need you right now. There's something in you. I need you. Will you come? Will you help? It's very contrary to what the Pharisees are doing. And it's very contrary to what the Pharisees are trying to prevent people from coming to Jesus. And Jairus is making this, I like to have someone's invitation. We make this, I need you right now. And it's just in front of everyone. So I just think there's something there. So Jesus decides to go. And that's awesome. But the interesting thing, and then here's where Jesus starts to work his amazing just awesomeness. That's a real literary term, amazing awesomeness. So they set out for Jairus' house, and a crowd presses in on them. And we think of that sometimes. It's like, oh, it's probably busy. Like we dismiss here. It's like, okay, I got to work through these tables. Oh, those two are talking. But it's like, it's like they're pressing in. If I get kind of, weird here with Wendell, because Wendell doesn't mind, because, embrace the pain. But it's like they can't move. And we know from like earlier in the chapter, Luke 4, where he's at the synagogue, and there's people again pressing in on him. They're ready to throw him off a cliff. Like Jesus just passes through with ease. It's just like, and he just made it through and it's fine. So it's obvious like he wants to be held up here. And Jesus knows this, but no one else knows this. And I'm sure Jairus is like, what's going on? But Jesus has a purpose in it. So Luke 8, verses 43 through 48, we know this story. It tells us, about the woman who's been battling bleeding for over 12 years. With the crowd pressing in on Jesus and Jairus, no one would take notice of her. Someone who's ceremonially unclean. And she takes this opportunity to go in unnoticed, because everyone's attention's on Jesus, and reach out in faith and touch Jesus. So now can I have someone read verses 45 through 48 of Luke 8, please? So this is awesome. And, we see Jesus' interaction. He knows full well what's going on, but he stops the crowd, pauses, on the way to going to Jairus' home. And my contention is he wants to further heal the woman. Now, he's already physically healed her. Last time, I did a time here, we talked about bipsis. So, the mental health term, biological, psychological, social, emotional, and spiritual. So she's already healed physically. Like, she's healed. She feels it. And she was probably good with that, but Jesus, being who he is like, no, I want to stop here. And there's a lot of things going on here, but he calls her out also to have her feel healing mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, because she was healed, she felt it, but the rest of the community doesn't know that. So what seems like kind of a weird, why is he stopping in and calling her out? I think he's doing it just to have that mental, emotional healing, social healing, so people know like, wow, she's healed. Jesus did something here. And just spiritually having that experience with Jesus, with God. So it's this really cool moment where Jesus has a full holistic healing. It's a great teaching moment. And Jesus is seeing the big picture here. And he's playing chess with us while we're playing checkers when we come to him. And this moment would inspire awe with everyone who would have seen it. Well, probably most people who would have seen it. What do you think is going through Jairus' mind right now during this whole time? What do you think Jairus is thinking about? I know what's to come in the passage, but just stop right here before reading on. What do we think Jairus is thinking about? Hurry up. Okay.
Well,
What else?
Robert, I can't help but think that this little piece is in there on purpose for Jairus, because it's not until after this that Jesus tells him to believe. So
Yeah.
he came to Jesus, not necessarily.
I said not to get ahead. Don't steal my thunder, Craig. Please. No, but you're absolutely right.
Everything I just said is.
No, but that's right. That's right. But right in the moment. That's totally Jesus. I got a bigger game that's going on here.
There might have been some hope there. I mean, he risks quite a bit by going to Jesus as
Yeah.
a Pharisee. And then on the way, here's a woman who's been healed. He's like, ha, I got the right guy.
Yeah. There's that tension of that. Hey, something's good here, but Elizabeth, are you saying hey, my daughter's dying. Can we speed this up? You're supposed to be amazing. I heard the story about you avoiding a mob. Can't we just get through this? Any other thoughts about what Jairus might be thinking about? So let's look at verse 49. I'll read this one. While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." So now what do you think is going through Jairus' mind? Now we know what's to come. But what do you think Jairus is thinking at this point? What changes in this moment? We see Jesus. I'm sure Jairus is thinking, all right, we're going to go. But then Jesus stops and has an interaction with someone else, which is a wonderful moment. We see Jesus address someone's pain. We see him address and heal their desperate prayer requests. And Jairus just only seems to be an observer. Jairus probably doesn't know that the woman's been battling bleeding for 12 years and everything that comes with that, the social stigma, all the different things that come with that. He's just probably thinking of his daughter, understandably. My daughter, I came to you and you stopped to help someone else. What about my daughter? Any situations from your own life that might come to mind? I know some of your stories, and I've wrestled with some of you about that, where you desperately cry out to God. And then it looks like God's going over here doing something, and what about me? I've been loving you. I've been following you. We witness someone else experience Jesus' healing touch, and it's hard to celebrate it because, what about me, God? Am I forgotten? And then you have to, just don't bother God with it right now. Just like that person said to Jairus, don't bother the teacher. So Luke 8:50. But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." So the fear is real. I think when we've been in that crisis, that fear is legit. Sometimes we feel bad for fearing. And it's no, that's a real thing. Jesus knows what Jairus is wrestling with in his soul. His daughter is dead. How often when a crisis hits do we look everywhere and nowhere as the crisis begins to envelop us? We are in shock. Shock begins to take over. So look at what Jesus tells Jairus. He says, "Do not fear. Only believe. She will be well." I don't know if you ever thought about this. I always wondered how this may have played out. So, I can see Jairus getting ready to break down, but Jesus kind of helps Jairus to recalibrate, to refocus in on him. So I think of the scene from Good Will Hunting. So at the end, for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll do my best to recreate it here. But so you have Robin Williams' character Sean, and he's being with Matt Damon's character Will toward the end, and it's come clear that Will's character has a history of just suffering and enduring abuse. And Sean is saying to him, it's, hey, all this stuff that happened, it's not your fault. And Will's like, yeah. Uh-huh. And Sean just keeps saying, no. Takes another step toward him, looking him in the eye, never breaking contact. It's not your fault. And, Will's like, yeah, I know. Like, he takes another step closer, continues to look at him. Like, he's resolute, but it's full of love, full of tenderness. It's like, it's not your fault. And then, you could tell, Will starts to get angry. He's like, this is uncomfortable. No, I'm not letting you in my pain. I'm not. He's like, it's not your fault. Just continues to walk directly, looking him in the eye. And I can see Jesus going up to Jairus. It's not like, hey, good, don't fear. Believe, all will be well. Peace out. It's going up. It's like, I can see Jesus like, don't fear. Believe. All will be well. I can see Jesus just making that direct connection to Jairus, because there's all this noise going on around him. His daughter just found his died. You've got a crowd of people they're going crazy over this healing that's taken place. Jairus doesn't know what to believe, and this Jesus in his love is like, all right, recalibrate. Look at me, right here. Do not fear. Believe. All will be well. So going back to our own circumstances, how often have we wrestled with God over a desperate circumstance where it seems He is not responding? In fact, it seems God is interacting and responding to others while you wait and witness. Time goes by. Nothing happens. Your crisis intensifies. You pray even more fervently for God to intercede, and God's response to us is not to fear, to trust Him. The thing you've already trusted in already, Jesus, to the best of your ability. So how do you respond now? Anger, disillusionment, cynicism, gallows humor? As your crisis drags on, and people who know of your crisis, they are ready for the crisis to end. They are tired of walking with you, perhaps, even. They don't want to wrestle with the possibility that God isn't going to answer prayers the way you all originally prayed. Remember what someone said to Jairus, don't bother the teacher anymore. Perhaps you've heard that before from others. You are told to come to terms with your reality. The situation hasn't changed. You hear comments like, well, God would have answered by now. People begin to treat you in a way that's equal to bless their heart. Do you give up? So Luke 8:51 through 53, it says this. And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. So I'm guessing Jairus felt a bit foolish when people laughed at him after Jesus said the little girl is asleep. We probably know the feeling of being laughed at for our faith during our darker moments. He, a Pharisee, let's not forget this, a Pharisee, which we already know everything that comes with that, and the contention with Jesus, and everything Jairus has done so far. And yet, he's continuing to be led down this path, which seems absolutely contrary to what we would probably do in that situation. He, a Pharisee, is hoping against hope, while being mocked for perhaps his infant belief in Jesus, someone his community despises, that his daughter is not dead. And yet Jairus keeps going with Jesus. It's an amazing act of faith, I think, there. So what happens? We know. Verse 54, but taking her by the hand, he called, saying, child, arise. And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Jairus is amazed. So we look at this passage from verses 40 through 56, kind of alluding to what Craig had said. There's a bigger thing going on. We always talk about the healing of the woman who had been battling bleeding, the healing of Jairus' daughter. But I also want to, kind of throw out there that I think Jesus had Jairus in mind. Jesus had Jairus' salvation in mind with everything that's going on. We can't know for sure if Jairus makes a decision to follow Jesus, but I believe he's using everything that takes place in this passage to help Jairus see who he, Jesus, truly is. Incidentally, Jairus, that name means Jehovah enlightens. So Jesus and Jairus set out for Jairus' home back in verse 40. We see this whole interaction take place. Of course, their intended paths to get there are radically different. Like many of us would, we think in a logical straight line that gets us to our destination as quickly as possible. So we're here with Jesus. All right, we need to get here. All right, let's go. But of course we know Jesus is like, all right, yeah, you know what? We're going to go over here first, and we're going to stop, and then we're going to go. We know this, and it's still hard when we face it in our reality. Jesus' path for us and the timing of walking that path stands in stark contrast with our expectations, with the world's expectations of the path and destination. But we see examples all throughout the Bible, and we know these. Joseph, who spent over 20 years as a slave and prisoner before leading Egypt. Moses, in hiding, away from Egypt for over 40 years before returning to lead his people. Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years before entering the Promised Land. David lived on the run from Saul after being anointed king of Israel. In each of those moments, God could have given them what they wanted in the initial moment they wanted it. However, it would have been to the detriment and the detriment of those around him. So, earlier I made this kind of statement about Jesus is playing chess with us when we're playing checkers when we come to him. So, no offense to you checkers aficionados out there, but checkers is kind of a simplistic game. And all the pieces are similar. Not that it's tic-tac-toe. I mean, they're all the same pieces. You can basically go, I'll go this way, or I'll go this way. Well, if there's a piece, I can jump it. But basically got two moves. It's an in-the-moment game. It's very reactionary. It's also considered a solved game. So if you were to play, there's a computer software called Chinook. Your best hope is a draw. You make one mistake, you're going to lose to the computer. The chess, however, is a more complex game with different pieces that have different moves that all simultaneously interact with each other. There are nearly an infinite amount of possible chess games. In fact, the number is, you don't want to see the space here, 10 to the 120th power. So that's 1 with 120 zeros. That's the amount of possible chess games. So the number of stars in our observable universe they estimate, but on the high end, a recent Google search, 10 to the 29th power. So you have 90 less zeros there in possible chess games. So why all this talk about chess and checkers? Because of the varying complexities of each game. Chess, a little bit simple, it's solved. And chess, where there's an infinite amount of games. And the varying approaches to life and faith we have and that Jesus has. So as followers of Jesus, we are aware there's a sprawling battle going on behind the scenes. So think of the wager between Satan and God that opens the book of Job. What subsequently happens to Job and the stakes involved with Job's response to calamity. To our knowledge, while Job is enduring and suffering in the moment, God never makes him aware of the bet he has placed with Satan. We're far removed from that situation, and we can easily see the end game God is playing. But again, did Job grasp the eternal significance of his pain and suffering in the moment? It's a reminder for us when disaster strikes. The world we live in is a complex system. I think we can assume that none of us has solved the game of life. And we may think Wendell has, but really, we have not solved the game of life. It's not checkers. Life has depths and intricacies that are subatomic. We mentally know this, but we still live our lives and practice our faith, generally speaking, like we are playing checkers, in the moment, with no real plan or consideration of something bigger going on. We know God is interested in our spiritual formation, and he will use people and circumstances that seem antithetical to who he is to bring this about in us. We see this extreme example in Joseph when we talked about this last fall. Joseph being allowed to endure family dysfunction, betrayal, slavery, false imprisonment to prepare him to lead. And Joseph sees the hand of God with him throughout this time. However, Joseph didn't say to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God meant for good, as he was sold into slavery. It was over two decades later, with the benefit of hindsight, experience, and of course, communion with God. So I say all this in the context of Jairus and his encounter with Jesus. We don't know what may have happened. In the moment, I'm sure Jairus is grateful for Jesus bringing back his daughter from the dead. It says he is amazed. At some point, though, my hope, my guess, is that Jairus is considering the path of Jesus, the path that Jesus led him on in this time. With all the accusations being hurled at Jesus by Jairus' fellow Pharisees, Jairus would have a tangible first-hand testimony of Jesus being the fulfillment of Isaiah 61. Now think about back to this passage in Luke 4, where Jesus reads the opening verses of Isaiah 61, and it talks about what he is here to do, to help people, to redeem people, to save people, to help the lost, the prisoner, the sick, all this. Jairus has seen this take place. We as followers of Jesus should know all about the complexity of life and faith. And yet when a crisis hits, instead of being mindful of something bigger going on, we revert to responding like a checkers player. This isn't always wrong, so I want to make clear here. This isn't always wrong, and it's understandable. A crisis hits, like with Jairus' daughter, and we want healing. An opportunity arises for escape from unspeakable pain, like with the bleeding woman, and we will grasp for anything. We will reach out and touch for it. But we come to Jesus with simplistic moves that are reactionary. It's not that we shouldn't act. We absolutely should, but we have to remember that something bigger is at play than our own immediate crisis, especially when our crisis goes on and on and on. We can't forget to lock eyes with Jesus, just like he did with Jairus in that moment of crisis. And like he did with the woman, he calls her out and looks at her. We can't forget, we need to focus in on Jesus in that crisis. It's not denying what's going on. We need to believe in Jesus. We need to trust in Jesus in that moment. This sounds like, a Christian cliche that should be on a t-shirt. God is the ultimate chess grandmaster. There's a stereotype of chess grandmasters that they can think up to 15 moves in advance. And that sounds cool, especially if you play chess and you're a grandmaster. But the truth is even more sublime. What separates a grandmaster from a novice is considering the play from their opponent. They think about how their opponent is going to play the game. Once a game develops, the grandmaster can see the end game develop faster than their opponent, and a grandmaster will steer their opponent's play until it results in them being checkmated. I mentioned earlier the infinite amount of chess games possible, 10 to the 120th power, and it dwarfs the amount of observable stars in our universe. Now consider that number. Consider the number of all the possibilities in our lives, all the choices, everything that could have happened, and the effects of those possibilities as they interact with the possibilities of everyone else and everything else in this world. God, being who he is, can not only see the end game of everything, where he is the victor, which we know, he sees the ideal end game for everyone in this world and how best it can influence everyone else's end game for the better. And God steers everyone's game of life to his and everyone else's advantage. We know this from Romans 8:28, 2 Peter 3:9, 1 Timothy 2:4. We know this. But in that moment, can we trust Jesus? When that crisis hits, not just say it, not just kind of like pat someone on the back and pray with them. Can we live it out? Throughout the Bible, we see God lead his people into and through difficult circumstances for their formation and the betterment of their community. And God knows full well what this is like. The Holy Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. David writes about God being with us in the valley of the shadow of death. Jesus surrendering his will to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane. God knows what it's like. He's been there. He's with us. And he allows us to experience crisis for a variety of reasons. And ultimately, it is for our benefit. In Jairus' darkest moment, Jesus asks him, "Do not fear, only believe. All will be well." In your moment of desperation, are you willing to believe Jesus has not only your best interests, but also the best interests of others in mind? Do you believe Jesus when you pray and it's not answered right away, that he has your best interests in mind and also the best interests of others in mind. I've talked with James a little bit, and you all know James's story, and I didn't say I was going to tell James I was going to talk about this, but I won't go in deep. But I know in talking with him, he wrestled with that. God, you know my story. I was advised that I didn't have to worry about this government thing. I'm trying to please you. Now you got me going over here to Bellevue? What gives? But I know James wrestles with God. He's like, I trust you. It doesn't make sense. You might be drunk, but I trust you. And it's not. And James won't deny the feelings, the emotions that comes with that. But as many of you have talked with him and walked with him, you know he wrestles with that, but he believes that. And it does. And it's hard to see from as a friend just what he's going through, what his family's going through. City Care's getting ready to do. It's doing great things, and it's going to do even more great things. And it's like, God, why are you doing this? But I know James is like, I trust you. I'm looking at you. I believe. People are laughing. People are telling me I got medical stuff. People tell me, don't. You know what? You're just going to have to deal with this stuff. I'm going to look at you, Jesus. Put out the noise. Can you wait 12 years, like the bleeding woman did, for God to answer your prayers? Can you trust God while you wait for your prayer to be answered, that something better is to come because you're waiting? Now, with the bleeding woman, her 12-year wait for healing was witnessed by Jairus. And as we've done here, we can only speculate the impact that it had on Jairus' life. So what is the good that has come in your life through prayers that weren't answered right away? Can you think of times where you were grateful? Man, God, thank you that prayer wasn't answered until a month later, a year later. Can you trust God even if you never enter into your own version of the promised land on this side of heaven like Moses experienced? Moses, faithful, 40 years of dealing with a difficult group of people. And he doesn't enter into the promised land. He makes a mistake, disobeys God. There's a lot of subtext there going on, but still, he doesn't enter the promised land. Now he does enter, gets to heaven. But are you okay with that? If there's something in your life that doesn't answer the way you want to before you die, can you say, yes, God, I believe? What does it mean for us to minister to Jairus' in our own life today? What's the crisis you need to trust God with today? So right now, we're going to have some time of reflection and prayer, and Jed's going to come up here and play a little bit. And I want you to reflect on these questions. Just here at your table, if you want to, the couches are there. If that's more comfortable to reflect, by all means go. But just take some time to reflect. Think on these things. Listen to the Holy Spirit. Think about the crisis you have faced in your life. Think about the longings you have prayed to God. Maybe it's longings not only you've prayed for yourself, but prayed for others. Pray for others in this room. I know many of you have things you're wrestling with, and it's crises. Where are you at with God in those? For some, if I may be bold, I want you to allow God back into that pain or back into that crisis. And that's hard. Because you can deal with it when you're like, God, I'm not going to open that. All right, that didn't happen. Moved on. But there may be someone that's like, you know what? I need to allow God back in and see how he's going to redeem that time. Redeem that situation. Redeem that crisis. So take some time just at your table if you want to read, just reflect. Some of you brought your journals if you want to write a little bit. But just reflect and pray. Listen to the Holy Spirit. And when you think there's a moment, maybe get 2 or 3 of you, pray for each other. If there's someone here in the room, maybe it's someone you know of a crisis on your team, they're sitting at another table, go get them, pray for them. Or you want someone to pray for you, go get them. Have some time of prayer here. Prayer for each other. That we trust God. That we will not fear. And trust in Him that all will be well. After a little bit of time, we'll sing together. And then I'll say a prayer. just to kind of dismiss us, and we'll move on with our meeting. But right now, just take some time just to reflect, listen to the Holy Spirit, pray, and we'll move on from there.